On this episode of Locked On Lightning, we're talking about who needs to go at the deadline, as well as checking in on tonight's game against Philly. And then we wrap things up with What If Part 2. All that coming up and more on Locked On Lightning.
You're Locked On Lightning, your daily podcast on the Tampa Bay Lightning. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome to another episode of Locked On Lightning, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Adam Danker. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Locked On Lightning. And as a reminder, today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code Locked On for $20 off your first purchase. On this episode, we're talking about who needs to get going out of Tampa Bay at the trade deadline, as well as checking in against tonight's game against the Philadelphia Flyers. And then since it was so popular with all of you and it really got the conversation going on YouTube about Lightning what ifs, we're coming back at the end of this episode with a part 2. Make sure to stick around for that one. And also make sure to subscribe to the podcast. Give us a follow wherever podcasts are distributed in audio form. We're also available on YouTube. Subscribe to the channel there and comment below this video to get in on the conversation. So we're talking about, because I saw the Lightning, the last episode. If you didn't listen to that or watch it, go ahead and listen to it and tune in for it, because it was a really fun episode. We did something that we've never done on this show before. We talked about what if things were different in terms of this player being healthy or this player, whatever. I mean, we spoke about it in the context of what if Vasilevsky was healthy to start the season. What if, would it have made a difference with this team, how they played the first couple of months of the season, as well as, what other things came into play with that? The defense, would Vasilevsky play better than Johansson? And if he did, how much better, and all that? We spoke about that as well. And really the conversation that you all had in the comments below the last video was phenomenal. So thank you for all that. And it really inspired me to do another segment. And I think I have a feeling we're going to be doing a lot of these in the future, especially with all the bad moves, or really the moves that haven't bared much fruit for this Tampa Bay Lightning team over the last, I guess, let's say year. So we'll get into that at the end of the episode, but we're starting things now with the deadline, coming up in just a couple of months, really, actually, a month or so away. And the thing that we've kind of spoken about on and off on this podcast, really, as we've gotten more and more into the midst, or really the middle of the NHL season, is, there needs to be changes with this team. I think we could all agree, whether it be internally from Syracuse or outside this franchise somewhere around the league. And the issue that we have always ran into when talking about potential moves that could be made, or moves that we would like to see this team make, the issue that we have always had in those discussions is the fact that the Lightning don't have much to offer. I mean, when you look at this roster and you look at some of the players that they have that they could potentially trade away, you got to ask yourself, what are you really getting in return? And it's one of those things where the Lightning, and it doesn't really have to do with money anymore. It has to do more with the fact that they've kind of backed themselves into this corner. And we could all say, or really look towards the Tanner Jeannot trade as really the big reason for this. And, I'm not inclined to really throw that into the mix of this just yet. Maybe later on the season, especially, if things don't work out for the best with this team. When I say that, I mean making a playoff spot. They've really backed themselves into a corner of not really being able to do, not allowing themselves, to do much to improve this team. It's really, in years past, as we've seen over the last couple of years, the Lightning have been able to throw around first round draft picks to get players that they want, be able to trade certain players here and there if need be. And we really can't, or not really can't, we won't probably see that this year. I mean, when you look at this Lightning team, especially, what they have in Syracuse, they don't really have anybody that jumps off the board that's really going to, be a prime blue chip trading prospect. And then, the draft picks are very much, gone at this point. And then you look at, maybe some of the lower players on this team, but really, when I look at some of the lower players on this team that I would like the Lightning to, I guess a more delicate phrase would be to move on from. One of them was actually mentioned last night, and really, I mean, it's one of those signings that in the time I was like, oh, okay, and this is under the pretext. I don't remember exactly when he was signed this offseason, but it was one of those things where I feel like we didn't get the Vasilevsky news yet. So, having him in the mix and kind of being that, having that veteran leadership and, bringing some of that scoring, um, was a very good thing on paper. And then I feel like we got the news and it was just, and then, you can see on the ice, it's really not coming to fruition is Connor Sheary. I mean, he's just been really disappointing this year. And it's not like they pick, and when I say veteran presence, I mean the guy's 31, so it's not like he's 40. It's not like he's really just going to be a guy who they bring in to be a locker room figure. No, he was brought on this team to score, accumulate points, and he really has not done much of each. I mean, he also spent some time hurt, but really through 29 games, 1 goal and 9 points. And then you couple that with the fact that he is playing somewhat high in the lineup or has played somewhat high in the lineup. I mean, he's playing on the third line now, which is, I think we could all agree, probably a lot higher than really I think any of us would really prefer to have him play. Having said that, you look at this team and you look from top to bottom and you say, who is going to be able to take that spot? And I mean, really the only names that really stick out to me are Luke Glendening and Alex Barré-Boulet. But at the same time, those aren't exactly names that are enticing that you really want on your third line right now. I mean, this team's pretty banged up too at the moment, so things are kind of jumbled all over the place. But the other names that I look at, or the other players really that I kind of think that the Lightning, we've had the experiment and it's just not working out. It's not something that really is going to be beneficial for this team for the long term, because when you look at this team, they need really two things, or one of two things really out of any player, unless you're the fourth line forwards as well as the third line defensive pairing. You need someone to either come here and play some sort of grinded out hockey, uh, defense, or they need to score. And this guy, it was fun while it lasted last year, but it is what it is at this point. And Nick Pervix is not something that is going to be helpful for the Tampa Bay Lightning going forward. I mean, it's just, we had a good time last year. He got off to a hot start and that was great. And he really, really just kept himself in the conversation. And he has certain moments here and there where he is able to make an impact on games very slightly. And when I say that, I mean, he makes a average play in like one sequence on a shift in a game. And that's your Nick Pervix bingo card slot for the night. But it's time to move on from this guy. It's a great story that, like I said last year, And then the other guy that has really just outstayed his welcome here has been Philippe Myers. I mean, was not at all impressed with him last year, as well as Hayden Fleury. I like Hayden Fleury, but I think we're at the point, even now though, that he's injured. I think that him, Philippe Myers, those guys kind of just you kind of need to call it what it is if you're Julian Brees-Boss. I mean, you can't really blame John Cooper at this point because you got 4 guys banged up and 3 of them are defensemen. So, what are you going to do? But I really think that at the end of the day, once, Eric Chernak at some point comes back into the lineup, if Tanner Jeannot ever comes back, Sergachev ever comes back, Fleury ever comes back, there, whether it be now and we start to map things out, or once those guys do come back into the lineup at any point, there needs to be some sort of internal conversation about what is the plan in terms of personnel. Because if I really hope that Julian Brees-Boss, if he's looking at this lineup right now, a healthy Tampa Bay Lightning especially, I hope he's not saying to himself that we could win with this team, because they certainly can't. I mean, we saw this team play certain games this year with or without Andrei Vasilevsky, where I believe everybody was in the lineup at least a handful of games, and it was really left. There wasn't really anything left to be desired about what we saw in those outings from this Tampa Bay Lightning team. Those are teams that could possibly give you a couple of good games here and there, but those aren't teams that are going to win playoff games in the long term. They're not going to take it deep into the playoffs, into an Eastern Conference run. They're certainly not going to take it into the Stanley Cup final. So really, at the end of the day, I mean, all you could do is really take that group of guys that I mentioned: Philippe Myers, Hayden Fleury, Nick Pervix, Connor Sheary, and try and, I look at it this way. I would rather, because I don't really think that you could really get much of a return in terms of a player out of that deal, whether you're grouping all those guys together or you're sending them individually to teams that need them, that kind of need that last piece to get to whether it be a playoff spot or over the hump into maybe a potentially Stanley Cup run. The Lightning need to get creative, and the only way they're going to be able to get better, I mean, yeah, the cap is going to increase, but at the same time, not significantly, where you're going to make yourself better as a team. So, I mean, let me know in the comments below. It's one of those things where if I had to predict, what kind of move Julian Brees-Boss is going to make at the deadline, unless something monumental comes to the table, is said out loud in the public square of, hockey news about what could this player wants out of this city or whatever. But at the same time, I don't think the Lightning would ever be in a conversation for any type of significant player that would be able to come into Tampa Bay right away, contribute right away. I mean, you could only strike lightning, twice, no pun intended. I mean, they got lucky with Nick Coleman. They got lucky a couple of years ago with Coleman. Sorry, with Nick Paul, as well as, a couple of years ago with Blake Coleman and, Barclay Goodrow. So, I think maybe their luck has ran out. So really, if I had to guess, this is the team that we have right now, maybe except for maybe a few minor players, is probably going to be the team that we're going to have after the February trade deadline. So let me know in the comments below what you think about that. I mean, I'm not holding my breath for any big moves or any significant moves that will greatly increase this team's chances of not only getting into the playoffs or even still fighting for a playoff spot, but getting into the playoffs and making some sort of progression throughout the Stanley Cup playoffs. So coming up in just a little bit, we'll be checking in with the Flyers game, seeing how that's going as they take on the Philadelphia Flyers tonight, as well as a little bit later on, we're talking more about Lightning what ifs. But first, let's talk about our first sponsors of the show today, and that is our friends over at Gametime. Now, it's I guess, now that we have the holidays over, this is the time of year, whether you're in Tampa Bay, New York, California, wherever you are, you want to go out, you want to enjoy the nightlife. It's post-holiday season. This is where you go out, especially in the new year, and you get to have fun. You want to have more fun. I think that's on everybody's bucket list or New Year's resolution. And what better way to have more fun than to go out? And what better way to go out and have more fun without the stress than to buy tickets without stress? And the only home for that is Gametime. Gametime is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all sports, music, comedy, and theater events near you. And right now, all users get $100 off when you buy a big game ticket with Vegas 100 with killer last minute deals, all in prices and views from your seats, and their best price guarantee. Gametime takes away the guesswork out of buying tickets. You get last minute tickets, flash deals, zone deals. My favorite feature is, you get to see the seats, your view from the seats before you buy them. So, you're not sitting behind a pole or a beam with obstructed view. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime right now. All Gametime users get $100 off a big game ticket with code Vegas100. That's Vegas100. Terms apply. Just download the Gametime app and use the code VEGAS100 for $100 off a big game ticket. Or if you're not going to the game, use code Locked On for $20 off your first purchase. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. So as always, I want to thank everybody for making us your first listen of the day. If you haven't already done so, please go ahead and subscribe to the podcast. Give us a follow wherever podcasts are distributed in audio form. We're also available on YouTube as well. Subscribe to the channel, drop a comment below this video, and join in on the conversation. I mean, I think that this is going to be an ongoing conversation for not only leading up to the trade deadline, but as well as post-trade deadline. And I think that that's going to be a conversation that's going to be had regardless of whether or not the Lightning make the playoffs, because there's a lot of holes in this team right now. And I don't see Julian Brisebois, really more so don't have faith that Julian Brisebois is going to get anything significantly done that is going to improve this team right now with the players that I just said that, I'm sure they're nice people. Don't know them personally, but I'm sorry, but their time in Tampa Bay is gone. But moving on from that, we're taking a look at tonight's game against the Philadelphia Flyers. Like I said, coming into this one, as I will say, with every game going forward, that every game is a must-win game for these Tampa Bay Lightning. They are fighting to stay in the playoff hunt right now. Going into tonight's game, they were tied with 53 points for that first spot in the wild card with the Detroit Red Wings, as well as a point behind the Toronto Maple Leafs for that third spot in the Atlantic Division. And they're going up against a Flyers team who comes to this game 25, 16, and 6 with 56 points, only 4 behind the Rangers, who, in my mind, and I think in the minds of many people, are one of the better teams in the Eastern Conference. And, we always talk about how the Metropolitan Division is a juggernaut. I mean, I feel like the Atlantic Division this year is just as good. And this is a game that I feel like the Lightning could easily get very much bullied into a loss. And, whether you just started watching hockey a couple of years ago, or you've been watching hockey for the last 30, 40, 50 years, really since the 70s, that, when you play against the Philadelphia Flyers, they're going to go out there, they're going to play physical, they're going to wear you into submission. They might take even some liberties here and there throughout the course of the game. But you know what? The Lightning are holding their own right now with 6:57 left in the second period. They're currently on the penalty kill, but they are winning this one 3-1, which is very good sign. Goals by Braden Point. Nikita Kucherov has 2 on the night, the second of which was a power play goal. Hagel, Radish, Stamkos, and Crozier all have points on the night. And my hope for this game is that, because like I said, the Flyers are a very good team. The Lightning are currently being outshot. I will take that into I will look the other way on that, because the Flyers have had 2 power plays thus far through about a period and a half. So there's that as well. The Lightning are 1 for 2 on the power play. I will say I do hope that the Lightning stay consistent. This is something that we've spoken about all season long with this team. Um, I think that really the key for this game going in, as is the key really for every game, is to play within yourself. Don't really be a reactionary hockey team. Don't kind of sit back and say, okay, we're winning 3-1. And then you blink your eyes. There's 5 minutes left in the third period and you're down by a goal. And here we are in full panic mode. And as we know, most of the time, I would say probably 95% of the time, when the Lightning are in panic mode, they do not nearly play anywhere remotely close to where they should be playing. And as I say that, they give up a goal on the power play, and the Flyers are within 1 goal of tying this game. And this is just the kind of game, like I said, the Lightning get off to a good start, and then we start to see the other team kind of chip away at them. And it's such a frustrating thing, and like it kind of it goes back to the point I made in the last segment, and have made really throughout the course of the season, is that we want to be optimistic about this team. They are in the playoff hunt statistically right now in terms of playing ability compared to other teams that are kind of in that realm as well. That is still undetermined. But I will say that, the way the Lightning play, not even, just disregarding the previous 5-game winning streak, the thing that is really alarming for me, at least, and this shouldn't be a reason to wish that the Lightning not wish that the Lightning make the playoffs. I feel like almost making the playoffs or falling into a playoff spot for this Lightning team would kind of be a wasted effort, or just because they do not have the caliber right now. They do not have the roster. And granted, they are a little bit banged up right now. They are missing 4 significant players. Well, three significant players. I guess Hayden Fleury is significant at this point. I guess he's played decently well this year. The Lightning don't have the team to play a full 60-minute hockey game. And like I've said very many times on this show, that is just something that is very concerning for me. It should be concerning for a lot of Lightning fans, really all of them, because as you are seeing tonight, the Lightning get off to a good start. I mean, it's really vice versa in terms of really pick your poison. The Lightning get off to a slow start in the first, they pick it up back in the second, or vice versa. They get off to a good start in the first, and then they start to kind of just whimper away in the second period. And then both of those scenarios, most of the time, lead to, like I said, a tight game in the third. Other team ties it, or they take the lead. And now the Lightning are kind of like, oh, crap, we got to start playing hockey again kind of deal. And that is something that does not work well for this team. And really, you look at this team as well. I mean, you could blame the lack thereof talent / depth, or you could even look at it like tonight, Andre Vasilevsky, through 35 minutes of play, his save percentage is below 9, which is not good at all. And if you remember the episode yesterday, what I said with him was that, I don't like to take goals against average into account, really. I mean, it's just one of those, I don't know. I mean, it's just I'll say save percentage. I'm sorry. Save percentage is not really a number that I like to really heavily weigh in terms of when I'm evaluating a goaltender. I look at goals against average, but at the same time, I mean, come on. Come on. I mean, you face 17 shots tonight, and we're almost down to the end of the second period, and you've given up 2 goals. You know, I'm gonna say it now, and we're gonna wait probably a couple of weeks before we revisit this note. You are supposed to be the best goaltender in the world. You got to start freaking playing like it, because if you don't, this team is not going to go anywhere. Because as we all know, you know, if the number one thing in the playoffs is solid goaltending, and you start to see the real teams and the pretending teams, or the teams that don't have the merit, and it really all comes down to goaltending in the Stanley Cup playoffs. And really, we could complain as much about depth on this team or lack thereof talent, but at the end of the day, like I said, there's going to be a time or sometimes throughout the course of the season where we're going to have to expect or hope that Andre Vasilevsky shows signs consistently that he is the best goaltender in the league, and really have to start playing like it. There's going to be some nights where he's going to have to shut out teams just to prove a point, to have a statement. And thus far, we haven't really seen it through his very still young season. So let me know in the comments below how you felt about this game. Obviously, some of you who maybe listen to this episode, the game will be over by then, even though you could still put in your thoughts about that as well. So coming up in just a little bit, we'll wrap things up with our Bolts What Ifs part 2. Really, it's a big one. It's not really many. It's just one. What happens to this team if the Lightning don't make the playoffs? We'll get into that at the end. But first, I want to talk about our last sponsors of the day, and that is our friends over at Sleeper. Now it's almost a halfway point in the season, Lightning fans. This team, really, to sum them up, their peaks and valleys, more so valleys. And regardless of where we are in the standings, I want to remind you that you could win big by playing daily fantasy hockey on Sleeper, the official daily fantasy app of the Locked On NHL Network. Sleeper is our number one choice for daily fantasy sports, and especially daily fantasy hockey, because with Sleeper, you can win 100 times your cash in daily fantasy hockey contests. You could pick players like Nikita Kucherov, Anthony Cirelli, or Nick Paul to take this week to win 100 times your cash. All you have to do is pick those guys to record more or less than their sleeper projections, like for things like goals, assists, saves, plus minus, and more in a given game. So go to Sleeper right now. Use promo code LOCKEDONNHL. You'll get up to $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. That's code LOCKEDONNHL. See Sleeper's terms of use for details and locational availability. All right. So once again, I want to thank you all for making us your first listen of the day, as well as making us your first watch of the day for those of you on YouTube. And I just want to thank you. If this is your first time listening, welcome to the party. And I especially want to thank you, our day oneers, our everydayers, those who come day in, day out and show that continued enthusiasm towards the show and help us grow and grow. Spread the word to those of friends of yours who maybe diehard Bucks fans, really never gave hockey a chance. Well, guess what? Now is better time as ever to get them into a new sport, beautiful sport. I mean, the Lightning, even though things can be bleak here and there with this team, really, I feel like there's still so much to this team that is untapped, and that's why it's just so frustrating when we see them fall short of things that we kind of figured that they would be able to accomplish. So before I get into the Lightning what if, just a little update on the game. The Lightning have taken a 4-2 lead now with a little over 2 minutes left in the second period. A power play goal from Mikey Esamont. I will say, just kind of touching back on some of the moves that have been made in the last couple of years. we talk a lot about here, as well as, when it's just talked about in general, when you reminisce about some of the moves that have been made over the last couple of years. We talk about, like I said, Blake Coleman, Barclay Goodrow, um, Zach Bogosian signing in 2020, Nick Paul last year. Excuse me, a couple of years ago. But it doesn't get talked much that often about Mikey Esmont. He has just been, and I'm talking about more so closer to the deadline deals. If I remember correctly, I don't think Hagel was that close to the deadline. If he was, that's probably one of the better, that has to be up there, I think, in the last 5 years of deadline moves. But no, I think Hagel was significantly earlier in the season. I wanted to say he was probably like November, mid-November, late November, where I think Esmont was like a week or two before the deadline. But right now, he's playing phenomenal. I think that really he is a diamond in the rough, and I really hope that he continues to progress and get better and better, because if he does, he is just such a good player, or at least shows that he could be such a good player in many facets of the game. But we'll stick a pin in that. We'll continue to watch him. But really, what I want to talk about is Lightning what ifs. And the big what if, I think, that is on everybody's mind is, what if this team misses the playoffs? What happens then in the offseason? Where does this team go? I don't think, and I'll start off real quick by saying, if this team doesn't make the playoffs, I think that in order to really be able to evaluate this team in the offseason and say, well, this player A, B, and C needs to go. I think that, as much as this might be a tedious task when you're looking at what needs to be changed, you kind of have to look at where they finished. If they were like a point out of that last wild card spot, okay, maybe you change a player out or two. But if, like, we're talking about more than a handful, if we're talking about 6, 7, 8, whatever points, if they really fell back, then you got to look at the whole team and say, what in God's name is the issue? And where do we got to go? Where do we go from here? Potentially you are getting a lot of money off the books if you let Stamkos walk in the offseason. And then, like I kind of touched upon an episode, I believe it was a couple of weeks ago, if the Lightning were to let Stamkos walk, does that open up the door for Victor Hedman, or them kind of sitting down or starting the conversation, at least being like, hey, buttering him up, saying, hey, listen, you're one of the most iconic players in this franchise, this, that, and the other thing. You're going to get your number retired when it's all said and done, maybe even a statue, who knows? But we're going to have a mini rebuild, and we think that it would be in our best interest, as well as yours, if we possibly explore a trade. I don't know if that's going to happen. I think that, especially with how thin the Lightning are in their defensive core, I think Victor is safe for now. I think when you look at the forward situation, I think that, money aside, I think that the Lightning would be better off without Stamkos. Maybe use that money to really just figure out your third and fourth line, especially your fourth line, and especially, parts of your defensive core, because, like I said, with Victor being safe because of just the lack thereof defensive support with this team, I just think that really I would prefer, and I think that this would be, and I think this would probably be the move, even if they do make the playoffs. I think that what this team should do is you let Stamkos walk, unless he takes absolutely the possible bare minimum that is possibly acceptable between two teams, him and the Lightning. You got to spend that money that you have left on defensemen, and then trade away the players as well that you don't want towards defensemen. And I'm not talking about a scoring defenseman. I'm talking about a guy like what we had in. As much as I gave this guy flack, he did come up in some big situations, like Jan Ruda, and especially a guy like Ryan McDonough. We all talk about it that if money was no object, Ryan McDonough would still be here in Tampa Bay, and that's something that really this team has missed since he was traded away to Nashville. And really, I'm very curious now with the what if, that kind of spurs a new what if. What if Ryan McDonough stayed in Tampa Bay? What would this team look like right now? Because he's playing phenomenal hockey in Nashville. And, that's also a hindsight thing. I know where the Lightning were going with that, and I understand. They say it was about money, but I'm sure there was some kind of conversation had, this guy's got a ton of miles on him. When should we expect the wheels to start to fall off? And I'm sure that was a conversation as well, because if they really thought that he was worth that money, which I think he is now, I think that he would still be on this team. But yeah, it's one of those things where I think that the Lightning, if they're behind in the standings, 8 points out of the wild card, I think you kind of have to start. I'm not saying like he's going to be traded or whatever the case may be, but you need to kind of look at like Vasilevsky, because I'm sure if the Lightning are missing the playoffs as well as being that far out of the playoff conversation, you kind of have to look at the goaltender. I mean, wasn't this the big buildup we were waiting for? The big crescendo. Wasn't this the plan? Well, we wait till, Vasilevsky comes back and everything's going to be good. Well, he's back, and hypothetically they miss the playoffs. Everyone's first reaction should be looking at 88. And like I said, he has been good in certain spots this year, but he has not been great. And he's being paid to be great. So let me know in the comments below what you think. I mean, really, we're such a long ways away from it, but given how the Lightning have played at certain times this year, really one can't not wonder what could potentially be on the horizon for this team if they were to miss the playoffs. So join us tomorrow as we will recap hopefully a win against the Philadelphia Flyers, as well as look forward to the rest of the week. So in the meantime, that's been it for this episode of Locked On Lightning, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Adam Danker. I'll talk to you in the next one.